Hi everyone, my name's Anita and I work in the content team at Smartbox, and I'm a specialist teacher and I've worked in special needs schools for quite a few years before joining Smartbox.
Hi there, I'm Becky and I am a speech and language therapist at Smartbox in the AT team. And Anita and I actually used to work together in one of the schools that she worked within. So it's going to be really exciting today to have a little chit chat about something we both feel really passionate about.
Yeah, so we've been talking a bit about story sharing and storytelling skills. And as it's National Storytelling Week, we thought it'd be really nice to share some of our thoughts with you and think about what storytelling looks like for an AAC user and what it might mean at different levels of AAC use and who might benefit from it. So we're just going to talk through some ideas and see what you think.
And I think one of the biggest things that both of us kept feeling and thinking when we were talking about all of this is just how wonderful it is to have that opportunity to be part of stories, whatever they may look like. And all those kind of feelings, that excitement. If I look back to my childhood thinking about stories, and if I think back to settings that I've been in, schools that I've worked within, stories are such a big part of our lives. So we want to make sure that that is possible for everybody. And we are really passionate about this at Smartbox.
So I think often when we think about telling stories, we think about sharing books and we
Mm,
think about published stories and all those old
mm,
familiar stories that you might have read when you were growing up and then you read to your own children or you read in schools or um, stories that we know and love. And
yeah.
that's absolutely really valuable. They're a great place to start. I think retelling stories, joining in on repeated lines, looking at who's in the picture and what are they doing, and oh no, what do you think that character feels? Those are all great things to be talking about when you're sharing a book, and that's just as much for uh, a, a young person who's using AAC as it is for any other
Mm.
young person. They're really important skills to develop and a lovely way to develop communication skills.
Definitely. Just like thinking about breaking up the process of a story. And I guess a lot of people don't even think about this, but that's why we do the job we do, isn't it, Anita? So we kind of think about it, and there's a lot of kind of stages to reading a story or being read to, and they're all really important. And even before that book is opened or that item that you're referring to is opened, that possibility of speculating what might be going on in the story, and thinking about how that listener, whether that's an AAC user or not, just what part they might play in that process of wondering what might happen by looking at the cover and thinking about the possible characters or the colors or whatever the scene is, and then knowing that a story has like a beginning, a middle, and an end. So pausing in between the story and um, conversing about what they might be thinking or feeling or anticipating as a result of what's been talked about, and yeah, conjuring up that excitement based on the kind of tone of voice and yeah, all the different kind of things that are unraveling as the story is told. It's a really exciting process, and it's a great way to feed someone's imagination as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think if you're familiar as well with the idea of different reasons for communicating or different functions of communication, then sharing a story can hit them all. You can be
Mm.
sharing information, asking questions,
Yep.
saying how you or someone else feels. You can be telling someone that something's gone wrong in the story and what happens next. So you can be hitting all of those different functions of communication through
Yep.
sharing a story.
Definitely. Yeah. So it probably feels like a good point in our chat to be thinking about, as obviously we've worked together as well, before Smartbox, with children, in particular, but actually just general situations where we've been with AAC users and what story situations we've been in with different AAC users.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to recognize that stories can be shared at whatever level an individual is working at, and that might be starting from a really early level of story sharing where you're involving lots of sensory experiences and you're telling the
Mm,
story more through those physical interactions, whether it's your
story
water spray coming
facts.
out
Yeah.
exactly and props and things that the listener can be exploring as you're telling the story. So even if they're not understanding every single word of the story, they're recognizing the pattern of the story. If you do it
Yes,
every day for a week, they're going to start to learn that, and they might build up that anticipation of, here comes the spray, and they might not
absolutely.
know what that means in the story, but it's building that
Over
excitement and that
time.
anticipation.
And we know, don't we, when it comes to sort of building our understanding of vocabulary and what that means, if you anchor meaning to a word or a phrase by immersing someone as best as possible in that whole experience. So, yeah, making it much more sensory. We know most of the time someone processes that information much better and has a better chance of retaining it and then maybe applying it or thinking about it or anticipating it next time it happens. And again, that kind of repetition element as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I was just about to say, it's a lovely way of building in if you've got sort of a single output button or Big Mac or something like that, and
Yes.
you can record the repeated vocabulary if there's a line that is said often in the story, and you can be encouraging the listener to join in. Then that's the
Yeah.
same way you would with any young child. They
Yeah.
get to know what's happening, they get to know the actions of the story or the repeated language, and they can join in.
And I think that's it, isn't it? That really does like bring it home is that it's about that involvement, but it doesn't necessarily even need to be staged. Sometimes it needs to be staged to make sure that the right vocabulary is available, but actually it's just about what would you do with anyone else in a situation where you're sharing a story? There's interjection, isn't there? There's people kind of get involved, or someone might try and finish your sentence, or someone might even try and divert you off into like another scenario that's made them think of something else because there's something going on in the story that they can relate to from a previous experience. So it just does so many different things for different people, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think thinking about those learners who might be a bit further on in their AAC journey and maybe are using a sort of a full vocabulary or one of our grid sets or something like that, they might be um, thinking about how a character's feeling. So they might be going
Mm,
into the feelings page and using that feelings vocabulary, or they might
that's
be
a
going
good
onto the
point.
actions page and say
Yeah,
talking about what's actually happening in the picture or on that page of the book. So I think from those really early stages of building up anticipation, building up repetition, building up familiarity with the story, through to starting to use your vocabulary in different ways to
yeah,
respond to a story and talk about what's happening,
yeah.
all of that's such a valid way of sharing stories.
And therefore, like you said earlier about our kind of reasons to communicate, that is what a story is a great opportunity to develop all those different ways and reasons to which we communicate. So you're kind of, it's like an opportunity, isn't it, to kind of explore and make use of lots of different types of vocabulary that then in another situation you might be even better at accessing because you've had lots of practice within a kind of story situation.
Definitely. And while we're thinking about different areas of vocabularies and grid sets and things, it's worth mentioning that we have lots of lovely story related resources in our grid sets. So, for example, in Supercore, in the school or the education section, we've got a whole area for stories, and there are some pre made grids with favourite stories like We're Going on a Bear Hunt or The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And what you find on those grids is you've got a column or two columns actually of really useful general story vocabulary. So things like page, look, listen, funny. And then on the other side of the grid, you've got specific vocabulary for that story so that the user can start to talk about what's happening in that story. And sometimes there's the repeated lines that we've already talked about, or the
Yeah.
character names, or the
I've
describing
um
words.
I've even worked with AAC users that like to be in charge of like turning the page. You know, if they physically can't do that, why can't they have an opportunity to do it in a different way? And actually, that can, that sense, lots of kids love being the leader, don't they? And kind of, doing that kind of role. So it's just, it's sometimes it's those littlest of things that can really open up an opportunity for someone to get more involved and attend more to a story because, that's their kind of role within the story.
Definitely, and giving them the choice of which story do they want today. If they've got all their favorite stories loaded up on there, they can choose, just like anyone else would, which story they want to listen to
Yeah.
during story time. So,
And even just
um,
like a quick reference on like even like in Supercore where you've got your purple cell that's got your questions, who, popping up and it flashes straight back to whatever page you're at. But if you click who, or what or where, you're practicing that language, aren't you? You're practicing that opportunity to think about what does the word who actually mean? But if you do it enough with someone, you attach meaning to it. So stories are a great time to be doing that.
Definitely. So, so I think alongside thinking about stories in books or published stories, as we've been talking about just now, there's a whole other side to storytelling, which is about telling your own personal stories.
Yeah,
And that's just as legitimate a skill and a really important thing to build up for our AAC users as it is for anyone else. So whether that's seeing your grandparents who you haven't seen for a while and you want to talk about your birthday party, or
sending a voice
sharing,
note.
yeah, sending your, exactly, or sharing your news at school. Maybe there's a session on that in school, or maybe you want to say what you
Yeah.
did at the weekend. Maybe you want to
Yes.
tell your friends what you've been doing. That kind of
Yeah.
peer-to-peer
Yeah.
sharing is
Yeah.
it's something we all do every day. Our day-to-day lives are sharing stories.
Absolutely. I'm thinking about like the pandemic as well. Like, a lot of people are not getting to see one another in the same way as they used to. So they've either got lots to tell once they're together again, or they're having to do it a different way, maybe on a video call or, ringing someone on the phone and then giving those messages out. And we want to make sure that an AAC user gets to do that as well, don't we? So they're telling stories just as much as we are, or they should get that chance to learn to tell stories in that way. We do it
Yeah,
all the
and
time, really, don't we?
absolutely. And I think in the same way that we talked about building up that short story sharing experience, depending on where the user is in their journey with AAC, you can do the same with personal stories. So it might be that you start from a really early level of just having a few key words that they relate to a particular picture that you're showing them of something that happened in their life, or it might be that you practice putting those words together to form a short story, and you practice that time on time on
Yeah.
time until they feel confident to share it with someone else. So there's different ways that you can build up those skills, I think,
Yeah.
of personal.
And just adding into that, it's okay to help someone set that up, isn't it? And kind of maybe steer them in a direction, because long term they might then be able to have a bit more independence at deciding what they want to say, but just giving them that opportunity to have something that you've kind of helped them make. And yeah, it could be as simple as them accessing a switch or touching a screen and just giving a few bits and what did you do next? And so, when did you eat the cake? Where were we? And there might be like a photo, like you referred to with our resources for the talking photos. I mean, that's just such a powerful way, isn't it, to share a story?
Yeah, definitely. There's
Oh,
there's a couple of places where again we've built in that kind of personal story sharing vocabulary into our grid sets. So thinking about the My News section in Supercore,
yeah,
um, that again needs to be built up by someone supporting the user, but then
yeah,
becomes a really valuable place that the user can go to themselves and share their news with whoever they want. And then, as you were referring to as well, the can I show you my photos, which is in the toolkit of Voco Chat.
that's
That's
right.
a lovely place to go, and if someone's been in and set up the photo in the middle of the grid and then they've got the information around the outside, it's almost an error-free way of sharing information, and
Yeah,
anything that any of the cells that they select at that point has some useful information about what's happening in that photo, and it can be such a motivating way of accessing your vocabulary, I think. Um, so yeah,
yeah,
really, really lovely skill to develop, I think. And I think picking up on what you were saying, Becky, it's absolutely um, right and good that that you can support people in this skill. So we're not suddenly expecting AAC users to tell their story completely independently. You might
yeah.
be ordering the props for them in the right way when they're telling their story, or
Mm,
helping them navigate to that area of their grid set to find the vocabulary. We just want them to experience that same joy that we do when we share our stories with the people who matter to us.
100%. Yeah, so true. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping up now, really, and coming to the end of this chat. And I think the sense that I've had, and I'm sure you'd agree, Anita, is just it's thinking about building connections with people, isn't it, and the world around us, isn't it? And that's what we know. That's what communication is, isn't it? It's about forming connections. And what better opportunity than to be sharing some kind of story with someone, being in a story with someone, giving someone a story, listening to a story with someone. It just it feels like you just it generates social closeness, doesn't it? If you're having these opportunities to tell stories.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what we were kind of alluding to with uh, um, talking about having that connection with someone when you share a story, or the idea that most of our conversations are um, story sharing in some form or another, whether that's
Yeah,
this has just happened to me at work today,
it's
or,
mad.
when I
Yeah,
went to the shop, uh, such and such was out of stock, and can you believe it? That's story sharing as well. And that's how you develop the relationships with the people in your life. And I think, as I said a minute ago, I think you get such a buzz out of being able to share your own experience of life with the
yeah,
people around you. And stories are such a great way of building up those skills.
they really are. It's almost like a life is one big story.
Exactly. So that's coming to the end of our chat now, and we hope you've enjoyed listening to us and some of our ideas around story sharing.
Yeah, I think we've tried to just sort of capture our sort of thoughts on things and thinking about it from an AAC user's perspective at different stages in perhaps their life. And yeah, just really hope that from this you'll gain some new insights or some reassurances about just the magic of storytelling and how important it is in all of our lives. Thank
And
you.
as always, if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to get in touch with us on our Facebook community or any of the normal support lines. And thanks for your time.